If you're someone who believes you're capable of more, but still trying to figure out how to build the confidence to take that next step, this episode is for you.
Driven by purpose, fueled by passion, my words got power, my thoughts have action, motivation, stay gracious, that's greatness, be audacious, motivation, be audacious, innovation, be audacious, inspiration, be bold, motivation, be audacious.
I think education is an opportunity for students to travel down paths that maybe they did not find accessible to them. And that's one of my primary goals in higher ed, is to really work with students to remove barriers and to make sure that they can move on to do the things that they want to achieve in life. So tutoring has been great because I'm able to use the skill sets in the classroom, but do it in a smaller setting and really give students that one-on-one attention that quite honestly is just not really feasible in a class of 30 students. First and foremost, we have no grades. So our students are there because they understand that we are working on a skill set. So I think that there is a place for AI. I think AI is awesome in a lot of different ways for people who are experts in that field. But I think for young learners, AI kind of robs them of that opportunity to be in that frustrated valley that we talked about before.
Yes. What if the real difference between people who succeed and those who stay stuck isn't talent, but the willingness to take strategic risks and keep learning along the way? This podcast is all about helping you unlock your inner greatness and live your best, audacious life. Today's guest is Dr. Meg Waldron. She's an educator, entrepreneur, and learning strategist whose work focuses on helping students and professionals build confidence, strengthen writing skills, and embrace lifelong learning in a rapidly changing world. You know, what stood out to me in this conversation was how she reframes learning as something much bigger than school. It's about curiosity, resilience, and having the courage to grow even when things feel uncertain. So now that we've got the table all set, let's dive into our conversation with Dr. Meg Waldron. Enjoy. Hey Meg, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you for taking the time to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm glad that we can make it work and get a good chat in before we move into the busyness of the holidays.
Yeah, it's good that we're able to do this, and I oftentimes say how much a blessing that it is to be able to kind of engage in dialogues that potentially can have an impact in the world and other people, right? And so if someone's hearing our conversation, it's and the fact that we have this opportunity to make a difference is very, very, very cool for me at least. So thank you for being here.
Totally agree.
I got to tell you, so one of the analogies that we oftentimes use on this podcast is we talk about sort of life being like a journey. It's a pathway.
Mm-hmm.
And on our pathway, we're going to have our own fair share of, sometimes unfair, but we're going to have our own experiences, our challenges, our setback, our obstacles. But then there's all sorts of bright things. And oftentimes those bright things, those beautiful things come on the other side of adversity and the challenges, right?
Yes.
And so it's really about, so knowing that, it's really about finding a way to move through that. So you got that boulder on your pathway, right? And it's, you either go up, over, around, or through, but the idea is getting to the other side, because as I said, that's where the greatness lies. And so that's certainly, I think I wanted to kind of frame today's conversation, because you know a little bit about challenges, adversity, and you're dealing with multiple sclerosis as an example of all the things that you've had to work through, and also the education system, which I'm really interested to get your perspective on as well too. And so maybe as a starting point, I can get you to introduce yourself to our audience, talk about the work that you do, and what's got you to the point that you're at now.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you again for having me. So I would say through and through, Audley, first and foremost, I'm a mom. I have 3 sons and 2 stepsons. They range in age from 16 to 22. My husband is also an educator. He works in juvenile corrections. So we are, education is at the forefront, and we're busy. We're busy at home with all of our guys. But I've been teaching for over 20 years. I started right outside of Washington, D.C. I was not planning on being a teacher. I moved in as a provisional educator, and I just fell in love with it. We had 81 languages spoken in the first high school where I taught. And it was really trial by fire. And I really ended up sticking around for a long time. I was fortunate to stay home with my boys when they were young, and I launched a tutoring company so I could kind of keep my foot in the door with education, and then went back into the classroom when they got a little bit older, and have since made the transition to higher ed. But definitely was not a linear path, lots of twists and turns. And as you mentioned, I was diagnosed with MS after my third son was born, which definitely threw me for a loop.
Right.
But I honestly feel like it's been my greatest teacher because it really helps frame my life for me. When you're doing well with MS, that's when you're trying to grasp at everything. So I honestly think it's helped kind of put things into perspective for me and in all honesty for my boys as well.
Curious, such a commitment to education. What sort of drew you there? What was it?
Yeah.
Because it's like you've done like from K to 12. No, is that?
In all of it.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I think I just love watching people grow and develop and really build confidence. So I'm a writing coach. So our youngest writers with our company are in third grade, but now at the university level, I'm working with students applying to med school. So it's really cool to kind of see, like, run the whole gamut to see students develop their confidence in writing and in speaking. And now I feel like with the advent of AI, that's even going to be a skill and a craft that students really need to hone, and it's going to actually kind of set them apart. But I think more than anything, I think education is an opportunity for students to travel down paths that maybe they did not find accessible to them. And that's one of my primary goals in higher ed is to
mhm.
really work with students to remove barriers and to make sure that they can move on to do the things that they want to achieve in life. So education is an awesome vehicle to do that.
Can you describe from the perspective of an educator that feeling when you're seeing maybe the learning develop or the lessons sticking or the confidence growing? What's that like from your perspective as an educator?
Yeah, so I taught IB English for a long time, and that's international baccalaureate classes. So we're talking no standardized testing. It's a really heavy based speaking type curriculum. And I think for me, one of the moments that really stood out for me was I brought students around to try to recruit students into this program, and they're hard classes. They're college level. They're taking them as juniors in high school. And this kid said, Dr. Walt, I wasn't Dr. Waldron at the time, but he said, she makes us do all kinds of crazy stuff. We have to get up here. We have to get out of our comfort zone. It's so uncomfortable, but it's awesome. And like, I think to hear students kind of reframe their own learning and to see the value in some of the unorthodox, wacky things that we make them do as they're kind of learning and growing, I think that really sticks for me. There's a professor out of Duke University, and she describes the learning space, and it's that uncomfortable spot between not knowing and knowing, and it's where that
Right.
frustration kind of hits. I really like seeing students kind of grapple through that learning space and come out on the other side. That valley can be a little rough for them at times, but I think when they really see their own growth and you teach a class maybe for a
Right.
semester and have them go back and look through all of their writing, and they're like, wow, like they can't even believe
Yeah.
it's the same person. So that's super rewarding, and I don't necessarily know that's something you get to see in all professions. So that part of it really, really hits.
I do really want, Meg, I really do really want to highlight, and I think maybe the unheralded or maybe not it's not trumpeted enough in terms of the role that educators do
Yeah,
in creating that environment. So as you talked about that space of not knowing, and we've all been in these situations where
sure.
we've not known, it doesn't feel good, right?
Doesn't
The
feel good.
uncertainty, not the
Right.
lack of confidence, it's not a good place to be, and so that's where the educator now comes in and it sort
Mhm.
of creates that environment where and so for example I think curiosity is a wonderful topic. I can
Sure.
talk about that for days
Yeah.
and nights and all. I
Yeah.
love it. And so to create that environment where curiosity is okay, because part of curiosity is being okay to ask questions you don't know the answers
Sure.
to, and
Yeah.
part of that is being okay with being vulnerable in front of your peers or others that go, I don't know the question. Maybe someone else does. I don't know it, right? And
Right.
so I think
Yeah.
those are really, really keys in the roles that educators play in helping with the learning process.
Yeah, I totally agree. I always tell my students there are no dumb questions because guaranteed
Mm,
if you're thinking it, somebody else has it too. And I always get nervous. Like even as an adult, if you go into a meeting and somebody says, the leader says, "Are there any questions?" and it's dead silent, I'm like, I have like 20 questions, right? You don't want to
yeah,
be that person. But I think asking questions shows you're thinking about thinking, right? That metacognition is important.
yeah,
So I also am really curious. I would say too, Audley, I think curiosity is important. I'm also a huge advocate of experiential learning. I think our students need to get in and do the work. A lot of
right,
education can be really passive. Like they're not just receptacles that we're like filling up, right? They need to like get out there and do it. Like if you want to be a teacher, go shadow all different levels of classes, not just an AP
Yes.
class or an IB
Yeah.
class or whatever. Same thing with, if you're going into the medical field, go shadow a nurse, start like in 10th grade, follow them around, see what they do. Because I really think it's important to know what the work is going to look like instead of just having, this idea from afar of what you're going to be doing.
And I don't say this just to plug the podcast, but those 2 points, trying things is audacious in nature.
Absolutely. Yes.
Being okay to step up and ask questions in a room where everyone else is around, that's audacious, right? And
Yeah.
so, thank you for the opportunity to make that bridge there, because
Yeah.
I do think
Yeah.
that it's very
Important
true.
life skills for sure.
That's it. Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Okay, so let's sort of talk about the MS journey and kind of
Yeah.
how that sort of sort of talk about how that the I guess the origin of your will and what the early days and then how it sort of reshaped how you change and live life.
Yeah. So after we had our last son, or I had my last son, I woke up one day and couldn't feel the left side of my body. And I thought, oh my gosh, something is not right. So after a series of tests, I was diagnosed with MS. And at the time, I had a newborn, 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. So you just kind of see your whole life flash before your
Right,
eyes in terms of, am I going to be in a wheelchair? Am I not going to be able
right.
to run around with these guys?
How long was that journey between
Yeah,
the
that's a great.
diagnosis to waking up and then having the diagnosis?
Yeah, it was actually relatively quick. I was really lucky. For a lot of people, it
Okay,
can be years
right.
and years of like being turned away at the door, right? So I would say probably within a year. And I found out MS is dormant when you're pregnant. So I had had my kids pretty close back to back. I had symptoms when I first started teaching. I fell a couple times. A doctor
Mm,
brought it up, and I was like, "Nah, I'm fine." So I think like it probably had been there. It just flared after he, really came to life after he was born. But yeah, it really kind of set me back for quite some time. And I really had to reframe my own thinking of what it was going to look like. And like anything, oddly, I think they try you on a bunch of different medications and you have to
sure.
fail a bunch of medications before you can, find one that fits. So I spent a lot of time when my boys were young in and out of the hospital, going back to school and then having to take time off to, stay home. But I think in those moments where your body is not going haywire, that's where I think I really found clarity. I actually had a very big pitfall with the after COVID. I was very, very sick. And so pivoted and really self-advocated. Now I'm over at Johns Hopkins and I, knock on wood, have not had any issues for almost 2 years. So I've been really lucky. I made it a life goal for mine to walk the Camino last year in Spain,
Mm.
100 miles. So that was, I said, once I get better, that's where I'm going with this. So I don't know those things would have happened had I not had MS. So it has been a thorn, but it also kind of, in a lot of ways, has been a motivational tool as well, I would say.
Do you remember sort of when it helped you realize that life had to change and so you couldn't do the same things you did before and that you had to adjust?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I also, when my kids were little, I had to give myself grace, right? So when you're sick, I'm like a get up and go. Everyone always jokes, like, where do you have all this energy? So I really had to learn to kind of unplug and step back and like focus on healing. So
Mhm.
a few times when they were young and I was hospitalized, and that's hard. I was a single mom. I had 3 kids. So you really kind of lean into your village. I had really great friends. My family was a huge support system. But I learned very quickly that I needed to concentrate on my health and eat,
Right.
in a way that wasn't going to make things worse for myself. And honestly, stress was the kicker with MS for me. So part of my move into going into higher ed was to kind of come out of K-12, which I loved, but I was on my feet all the time and it was a pretty high
Yes.
stress environment.
Right. Right.
So I was able to kind of bridge, my background and my passion for education and figure out a new way to help students in a way that would also make sense with having a condition like MS.
And then I would imagine from what it does in terms of even reshaping how you view resilience, what that
Sure.
means for you.
Yeah.
Maybe even leadership too, I guess, to a certain degree also. Like it just really changes it.
Yeah, and I think I'm much more empathetic. I mean, there are a lot of students dealing with autoimmune conditions, and I think
Yes.
when they're invisible, right? So if people see me, they're like, she doesn't look sick. So I think, and I don't consider myself sick most of the time, obviously, but when you are really struggling with MS, and sometimes it can be cognitive, sometimes it can be physical, nobody sees that necessarily. So I have students that will come to me and they'll privately tell me like, hey, like I'm suffering from this, or I have diabetes. And I'm really upfront with my students, especially because I work with pre-nursing and radiation science students. And I tell them, hey, when you're giving those MRIs, like I'm your patient, right? So like I'm that face behind these people that you're going to be working with every day. So I think it's really important to normalize having chronic illnesses so that, you can still work, you can still do things. I think it's important for kids to be able to talk about those issues and not feel like you kind of have to hide it. And you're not going to be successful or a leader if you're struggling with one of these things.
Can we talk about the transition into tutoring, right? Because it's now
Yeah.
it's an entrepreneurial journey for you. So the decision to make that, I guess I'm imagining it was intentional in terms of, going from teaching where you sort of had that stability, right? And now you're in a world of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. I think at heart, I'm an entrepreneur. My brother's an entrepreneur. My sister's an entrepreneur. So when I wanted to stay home with my boys, I wanted to kind of keep my licensure up and kind of keep my skills fresh. So I was really fortunate to come into contact with another small business owner, and he realized that, there is collaboration at the top, not competition. And he's like, hey, like there's plenty of business. This is how you can set it up. He kind of helped me with that framework. So yeah, this is year 19. So it's been a long
Wow.
haul, but yeah, we've been able to, the dreaded pivot word, right? But we moved online during the pandemic, and it really
Yes.
opened things up for us. It allowed us to work with students outside of our geographic area. So tutoring has been great because I'm able to use the skill sets in the classroom, but do it in a smaller setting and
Yep.
really give students that one-on-one attention that quite honestly is just not really feasible in a class of 30 students. So yeah, it's been awesome. And I just launched another business about 2 weeks ago, which is a whole other ball of wax. But I think having that growth mindset and that curiosity is a big driver for me as well.
And so that's Smart Solutions Tutoring,
Tutoring.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so how does it sort of challenge, or does it challenge sort of traditional ideas when we talk about even like learning and even and how students evaluate success?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think first and foremost, we have no grades. So our students are there
Oh,
because they understand that we are working on a skill set.
yes, yes,
We predominantly worked with students one-on-one. We had a tutoring center before the pandemic. Obviously, that shut down with the pandemic. So once we all went back, we're all teachers. Once we all went back into the classroom, because we do tutoring in the evenings, we really noticed, Audley, that our students were missing those soft skills. They were really struggling to have conversations like this. They couldn't make eye contact.
right.
So we moved our model. We still do some one-on-one, but we do something called small learning communities. And they're really writing circles where students are working on skills, practicing different areas of writing, whether it's academic or creative. And they're doing it in a small group online and giving each other feedback. And that's where we really started to see the confidence just blossom. I think when you have an audience, you're much more apt to put those details in and to kind of put more effort in as well. So we take out the stress of grades, we take out, that type of
Okay.
evaluation, and it's really more
I love
feedback.
that. Now you got my
Yeah,
attention with no grades. I gotta tell
they're
you.
great. They're great. Yep. Tons of written feedback and tons of, verbal feedback as well from not just us, but from their peers as well.
Well, it just takes the pressure off, right? It
Sure.
takes the pressure off. And I think what it also does, it eliminates, and you sort of talk, I know in another context, you sort of talked about no competition, but it sort of eliminates that in the classroom environment where it's like, what'd you get? What'd you get? It's like, well,
Yeah.
now the conversations are, do you understand this? I get this. Explain that to me. Like it's very, very different, right?
Right.
And I love that. And I also think what that allows is for, and you can tell me, if I'm way off here, but the idea now is so you shift away from grades and you
Hmm.
focus on subject material, comprehension,
Yes.
understanding, and that allows for what more thinking skills, and critical thinking skills, even for that
Sure.
matter.
Sure.
Um, on this topic of critical thinking skills, I wondered, because you talked about AI, early on, how important do you think that'll be moving forward?
I think it's going to be a game changer for a lot of different industries. So obviously AI is going to automate so much of what we do. And I think
Hmm.
I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading about what AI means for the young mind. And MIT recently did a study where they essentially took three groups of students. one group of students was just writing an essay, the other was using Google to kind of research, and the other was using ChatGPT. And the takeaways, they actually published the study before it was peer reviewed because they knew it was such important information, and they knew AI was just taking off at such a fast rate that they wanted people to get this information before the 9-month peer review process.
Yes.
So that tells you like how hot off the presses it was. But what they really found was obviously what we would expect was that the students who were using AI to do the writing, they weren't retaining information, they weren't really learning, and that was showing in scans and brain scans and things like that. So I think that there is a place for AI. I think AI is awesome in a lot of different ways for people who are experts in that field. But I think for young learners, AI kind of robs them of that opportunity to be in that frustrated valley that we talked about before. Yes. It's a great tool, I think, for students to help generate ideas and things like that. But I think for people to be able to have their own voice and to kind of work through the writing process and work through those stages of writing is going to be critical. And I think you're going to be an outlier if you can write, I think, in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if you think about, even like writing prompts, like
Sure.
the ability to articulate what you truly want or what you truly intend on, because as we know, AI will give you what you tell it, and sometimes what you tell it isn't what you meant, right? And that's where the whole there's one funny prompt. I remember I asked it to generate an image once, and at the end, I asked them to describe like a person, and they had like 3 arms.
Sure, right.
Right? Because that's not what. But when I looked at what I said, I get it why it was, because it was I wasn't clear. And so that's the idea of where you need to be very, very clear. And I think that's where the writing and being able to comprehend and articulate comes really, and communication becomes really, really important.
No, absolutely. And I think so much of kind of going back to what you're saying, that it tells you what you want to hear. That's where I feel like in coming years, there's going to be much more policy with AI. I went to a conference, oddly, and they were saying that in the future, AI will be basically like water or electric. It'll be a utility where it's not just going to be this open source. Right now, it's just collecting all the data, right? So I thought that was a really interesting phenomenon. But they also were, describing, and I think this is a great way to put it, that, if I'm a teacher and a student writes an essay and I say, Audley, this is great, you have an A, go to recess, you're like, sweet, right? But if I'm a teacher and I say, Audley, you got to go back and rework this paragraph, it's not really clear, that's annoying, right? Like, we don't want to hear that. Well, AI is that first teacher that sends you to recess. And so I don't think the MIT study found that children that used AI to write, they weren't challenging the argument that AI gave. So they were just accepting it at face value. And that's the missing piece with the critical thinking, right? When we are researching, we're thinking, does that make sense? We're putting our ideas together. AI gives you the information, kids are taking it at face value and they're running with it. So that's where I think there's a little bit of a gray area.
So let's talk about, this wasn't intended to be an AI conversation, but we're here, the train's on the tracks here. So let's talk about how we effectively integrate into education. Because the fact of the matter, we know it's here, it's not going nowhere. And so it's how do we use it? So I don't even myself, for example, I've just gone through a book writing process, and I've there's different points where I used AI to help, whether formulate ideas, brainstorm, so very much a collaborative tool. At no point I say, hey, can you write this 10-chapter book for me and be done by 2:00 today, kind of a thing, right? That's very, very different. And so I think like and you used the word tool earlier. I think exactly what it is, right? Bearing in mind it's not a tool as opposed to a replacement. Is that?
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. And I think students are using it in the same way in some capacity. I think when it's fully doing the thinking and generating the work, that's where it gets a little bit tricky. And as somebody who is a speaker and a writer like yourself, you're able to see what it wrote and say, oh, I would never say that like that. That doesn't sound like me. But I think the difference is like a 5th grader doesn't know what they sound like yet. So that's where it gets a little bit tricky, where they're using it to substitute learning versus to use it as that tool. So I think that education has a long way to go. And the hard part is it's coming at us so fast. So even in different settings, whether it's business, higher ed, schools, there's not a lot of policy because by the time they write the policy, it's changed. So I think it's kind of the wild, wild west right now, but that's also exciting to kind of see, how it will be used. Most importantly, I think it needs to be used ethically. And I think what that looks like will come into fruition soon.
I remember when they introduced calculators in school and the upheaval that caused, right? So this is kind of reminiscent of that a little bit, but like calculator 2.0, if you will, right?
Yes, for sure. Yes. And then some, you got it.
You talk about strategic risk taking and you know, or blind leaps, you know, strategic risk taking. How do you define the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you're doing something blind, you haven't really thought through all the parameters, the what ifs, how things might look. I think strategic risk taking, you know that it could go south, it could go terribly, but you also know that it could take off. So recently, I was given the opportunity to launch a group here in the US. It's called Women in Change, and it's basically for lifelong learning, but for women. It started in the UK as change management. I said, I'm an educator. And they're like, we're just looking for people who are interested in being change agents. And I said, well,
Right.
teachers, definitely that. We've got that down pat. So we are launching here in the States in January. And so I would argue that's strategic risk taking. That is a totally different business model. I'm
Yep.
working with a completely different group of people, but I can take my skill sets that I had in education and apply it. So I think strategic risk taking, you kind of weigh the pros and cons, and you're still willing to take that leap. I think
Yep.
blind ambition, you're just running into the wind and hoping for the best. So they're a little bit different.
And again, the strategic risk taking, you know that because that's essentially what
Right.
you had to do, right?
Sure.
From teaching
Yes.
entrepreneurship. So I
Yes,
get it.
absolutely.
It's interesting. Audacity as a word or a concept or a principle, I've realized it's become very, very personal to me.
Mm,
And obviously, I put my flag here, and this is right. I'm
yeah.
waving it and that kind of stuff. And so, absolutely, that's clear. But when I sort of realized that it showed up and existed, in, you know, various aspects of my life, and those it turned to be beneficial for me. That's when I turned to say, "Hey, guys, you got to jump on this train. This is like a really cool thing, and be a part of it."
Yes.
And you know, and I remember listening to a podcast once, and the person just like they were talking about they actually were talking about audacity, but they were describing it in a negative sense, in a reckless kind of. And I remember
Mm,
being personally offended for the word. I
yeah.
never, and I
Yeah.
realized that how deeply connected I am to it. But I and I heard the person's point. I understood it, but to me, it's much deeper than. So what you've just articulated with respects to, there's a strategic component where you're very intentional. That's audacious. Are there instances where you're kind of taking this blind leap? So, you know, I oftentimes quote there's a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. where he talks about taking that first step when you can't see the entire staircase. And so
Right.
the point is that both are, it encompasses both very much so. And it's just a matter of, you know, in the moment, what you need and what you turn to, if you will. And so I just want to
Yeah.
get
No,
out
I
there.
think words have power, right? Like I love thinking about, I talk with students a lot, like, is a word, does it have positive connotation? Does it have negative connotation? Is it neutral? And I mean, audacious, you're taking those bold moves, right? So for me, it's all things positive. I think for other people, it's scary. So it
Yes.
holds that negative connotation. So I can see where the person you were describing might have seen it as negative, but that probably is coming from a place of fear, I would guess, like, because it's scary to make bold moves.
So then I think this leads to a question naturally that I ask a lot of guests is what does audacity mean to you personally?
Yeah. What day of the week?
This is also true. So
Yeah, I
today, how about
mean,
this? Today, how's it today?
yeah, I think it's important. I'm a lifelong learner, and I think it's important for us to make bold moves for ourselves, right? I think we need to be audacious in lots of areas of life, but I would argue that at any juncture, school education is not just for kids in school, right? Education is something that we should be doing until our dying breath, like in terms of pushing ourselves, moving the needle, making those bold leaps. So for me, being audacious is investing in yourself and educating yourself, and hopefully passing that along and helping somebody else along the way.
I've got to tell you, Meg, what I really appreciate and love about your story is you've definitely had your challenges and obstacles. Um, but much of this conversation has been spent talking about those things,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's about what you do on the other side and how you
sure,
give back through education and help you others grow. And so, and I say that because oftentimes when people go through challenges, that challenges becomes their life journey, and that's what
sure.
defines them. And
Yes,
so, you know, yes, we mentioned MS very early on, and we've not turned back to because that's not the
right.
end of the story. And for many people, that is. And so I did want to acknowledge that because that's a really, really important point. And you've clearly
Yeah.
you've done the work to get to where you are now.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't want to minimize that for anybody. I think everybody has their own journey. I think at the end of the day, Audley, it's what we decide to focus on. Right. So when I was younger, my mom would say, "You're harping, Megan." Like if I brought something up that was negative over and over, "You're harping." And so I remind myself, right, like there's days that you wake up and you feel sorry for yourself. Like this stinks. Like I don't feel good. And I mean, that you don't have to have MS to feel that way. But I think it depends what we decide to kind of put our attention on. So for me, I have found my whole life when I put my attention on other people and helping other people, inevitably it makes me feel a whole lot better.
Yeah. It's awesome. Something that we like to do here is the fearless fast round. Throw out what first thing that comes to your mind. We like to have fun with it. Want to give it a shot? Are you okay with that?
I'm gonna have a sip of coffee first, and
Well, it's funny because one of the questions I was going to ask is coffee or tea.
Coffee, 100%. That's how I have all this energy, Audley. The only way.
Morning routine or night owl productivity?
Did you say morning or night owl?
Yeah, morning routine.
Morning. I already did my walk with my 5 ladies this morning before we got on here at 7 a.m. You got it.
Pen and paper or keyboard?
At heart, pen and paper, but realistically, keyboard.
Biggest myth about writing?
That you can't do it.
I can resonate with that one. I remember for the longest time, I told myself I'm not a writer, and here I am writing a book. There we go.
Yeah, good for you. That's awesome.
One word that defines leadership today.
Open-minded.
Okay. If there's a book every parent should read, what would that be?
Let's see. To Kill a Mockingbird. We all need to be a little bit like that dad, right?
There you go. Comfort or growth?
Growth, 100%.
Yeah. The failure that you're most grateful for?
I was not given a job, or I was not offered a job that I thought was made for me, but I think it opened the door to really other, awesome opportunities.
Teaching kids or mentoring adults?
Oh, wow. Probably teaching kids. Mentoring adults is easier, but I find a lot of joy in teaching kids. They're funny.
What is a risk that you're glad that you took?
Walking the Camino, 100 miles in 10 days, but we finished.
Legacy over accolades?
100% legacy.
There we go. We got to the other side. That was easy. You nailed it.
I mean, finished my first cup of coffee.
That's it, the coffee. I got the coffee. This is awesome. For listeners that wanted to connect with you directly, learn more about your work, or again, the Smart Solutions Tutoring, where can we send them?
Yeah, so we're at Smart Solutions Tutoring VA, and you can find us there, or I'm on LinkedIn at Meg Waldron, EDD.
Awesome. We will make sure that all the appropriate contact details are in the show notes. Megan, this is awesome. Really, really do appreciate the time. I love the journey. Like I said, you certainly weren't defined by what's happened to you, and you use that as a springboard to launch into other things, which is fantastic. Again, like we talked earlier, sometimes life is about making those pivots and changes and knowing, okay, I used to do this, can't do no more, but here's what we'll do instead. And it's beautiful to see. And so congratulations. And thank you again for being a guest on the Audacious Living Podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, welcome back. Really appreciate Meg for being here. One of the things that really stayed with me from this conversation was her perspective on strategic risk taking when it comes to learning. So many people wait until they feel fully ready before they act. But as she pointed out, growth often happens when we step forward before everything feels perfectly certain, because that day may never come. If you're someone who's trying to move forward in life with more confidence, today's conversation is a powerful reminder that learning isn't just about information. It's about curiosity, courage, and the willingness to keep evolving forward. Now, before we close out today's episode, it's time for another Audacity in Action moment. We take a quick look at something happening in the real world that reflects the power of Audacious Living. And a great example of this is Sal Khan, the founder of Khan Academy. What started as tutoring his cousins online eventually became a global learning platform used by millions of students around the world. His willingness to experiment with new ways of teaching completely transformed how people access education. Make sure you connect with Dr. Meg Waldron. She's doing some incredible work helping students and professionals develop confidence in their learning and writing, and we'll include all the appropriate links in the show notes so you can explore her work and learn so much more. Now, if this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to follow the podcast and leave a review. It helps more people discover the show and gives them an opportunity to live life audaciously.
Driven by purpose, fueled by passion. My words got power, my thoughts have action. Motivation, stay gracious. That's greatness. Be audacious.